Chapter 9. A few months later, Makalay began to feel nauseated. Sometimes she had spells of dizziness plus a strong desire for eating unripe mangoes and sour fruits. Pose gladly supplied her with many. The elderly woman gazed intently at Makalay each morning, watching for a bulky stomach. One night, while in bed, Makalay leaned over Yankuba several times to spit. Yankuba grimaced. Makalay leaned over and spat one more time. Yankuba sat up. For goodness sake, he rasped, find a cup to spit in. What's the matter with you? She shook her head, large eyes staring at the ceiling. I don't know. I think I ate something. She sat bolt upright, clutching her throat, then quickly shoving Yankuba out of the way, she sprang out of the bed, flung the door open and ran to the backyard. Yankuba unfroze, grabbed the lamp, and raced after her. He found her squatting on her heels at the yard, vomiting violently. Yankuba stared at her, his face flushed with ignorance, then raced back into the house with the lamp. Suddenly he remembered that he was leaving Makalay in the dark. He spun on his heels at the doorstep, deposited the lamp beside the still retching Makalay and dashed back into the house to wake up his parents. He thundered blows on their door, dancing on the balls of his feet with anxiety. The door swung open to reveal Dura and Pose, blinking sleep from their eyes. Yankuba gave them no time to ask questions. Makalay, he gasped. She's sick. He grabbed his mother's hand and pulled her across the parlor to the yard outside. Dura followed with rapid questions that were ignored. Considering the problem, a feminine one, Pose shouldered the men aside and studied her daughter-in-law. Gradually her creased face stretched into the most winsome smile she had ever released. Her heart began to pound. She had diagnosed the situation and was convinced of her interpretation beyond the shadow of a doubt. She's pregnant, Pose announced in a quivering voice. Our Makalay is with child. Yankuba stared stupidly at his mother. Pregnant. Makalay is pregnant. He studied his wife closely as if doubting her ability to accomplish that biological feat. Yes, my son, Dura smiled with a proud nod. You are going to be a father. I'm proud of you, my son. Me, too. Pose said, wiping away tears of joy. She approached Makalay and helped her to her feet. Come, my daughter, you must rest. Yankuba was exhilarated. He stared after the two women in his life as they made their way into the house. At last mother had fully made peace with Makalay. A sense of profound happiness overcame Yankuba. He jumped and punched the air with an exclamation of wow wow. What is it? Dura jerked back, looking around wildly. A snake. No, father, Yankuba stuttered. I was just exercising. HMMF. You have strange habits. Come, let's follow the women in. Pose took Makalay into Yankuba's bedroom, helped her get to bed, then tucked a blanket around her. She returned to her room in a fever of excitement and got back to bed beside Dura. I am going to have a granddaughter, she burst out. I prefer a girl to a boy. Dura, don't you prefer a girl to a boy? She will get married and have children at an earlier age than a boy. Then also, there is the matter of initiating her at the Bondo Secret Society. Imagine the songs and dances, the colorful costumes and the female masked dancers. She clapped her hands rapturously. It will be so wonderful. I just can't wait for that day. She stopped talking. Something was wrong. She stared at Dura for an uncomfortable moment, then began to shake him. Wake up. Dura. You are going to be a grandfather and you are sleeping. What a shame. Come on, wake up. Pose. Dura rolled over from her. I want to sleep. We will discuss the child's future later. Annoyed, Pose turned her face to the wall and began to sulk, grumbling with fresh vigor about the uncaring attitude of Dura. She went on and on and on, and Dura did not sleep a wink. Makalay's pregnancy soon became pronounced, stretching out in front of her month after month as if, after swallowing a large calabash one month, she had swallowed a larger one the following month. Sometimes she would rub her palms around the taut skin, talking to the baby within. Watching his wife progress steadily towards labor never failed to excite Yankuba. To see him express delight over his unborn child, or fussing like a worried hen over Makalay, you would think he was the first man on earth with a pregnant wife. He would talk, sing, and read to the unseen baby, bringing giggles and laughter from Makalay. "What sex do you prefer?" Makalay asked Yankuba, snuggling closer to him under the covers. "A boy or a girl?" "Both," he murmured. "Two at one go, and then you could have a long rest, years of rest." "Twins," she sighed. "I can't give you twins. But most men prefer a boy. Suppose I give you a boy, what name would you give it?" Let's see. "Yankuba. I'll give him my name." Makalay pinched his side, and he howled in pain. "Serves you right," she said. Fathers who give their names to their sons lack not only a creative imagination but betray mental laziness. She kissed the corner of his mouth. "I promise you a boy, a handsome boy. Unlike you." As the months rolled by, Makalay's belly grew so heavy she walked leaning backwards. Yankuba began to worry about that. He thought she might fall over. She could no longer see her knees if she looked down. She did nothing except eat and sleep. Her mother-in-law saw to that. Nothing, absolutely nothing, must be allowed to disturb the pregnancy or the mother of this long-awaited grandchild. The day came when the contractions started, each lasting some seconds and coming at intervals of several minutes. Makalay was quickly rushed into the labor hut 2 houses across the road. It was a small hut made of thatch and reeds. The midwife was sent for. Pose was beside herself with ecstasy. She was here, there, and everywhere, helping the midwife to get all the paraphernalia needed to assist Makalay deliver safely. How she wished Dura were around. Anyway, by the time he returned home that night, he would have become a grandfather. That would knock him out of his senses. Outside his veranda, Yankuba paced up and down, giving sharp expectant glances at the labor hut. He had wanted to hang around by the door but was told it was a taboo. When he inquired about going inside to see Makalay, the midwife gasped in shock and told him that it was an unthinkable abomination for a man to do so. Yankuba contented himself with rambling about the veranda, sitting down one moment, getting up at the next with loud sighs and groans as though he were in labor with his wife. Suddenly he stiffened as a loud scream, emanating from the hut, pierced the late afternoon stillness. Inside the labor hut, Makalay pushed, puffed, groaned, gasped, and shrieked Yankuba's name as the midwife and Pose coaxed her to push harder. She did, and suddenly an excruciating pain throbbed all over her body as the baby came out. A minute later it was followed by another baby. After that, an unbelievable sense of relief enveloped her exhausted body. "Twins," cried Pose. "My daughter, you have surpassed the daughters of Pa Adekali. You have proved successful beyond my expectations." "Boys," announced the midwife, after examining the tiny bundles of flesh. "Twin boys." Pose heaved a sigh, slightly disappointed they weren't girls. She looked across at Makalay and said, "2 boys are better than 1 girl, aren't they?" Makalay replied with a weak smile. The news leaked from the hut and spread like wildfire. The village could not remember when last a woman had given birth to twins in Pa Adekali. Yankuba was stunned for a moment. His joy was beyond words. Makalay had gifted him with twins. So, all along while he thought he had been talking to 1 baby, he had actually been talking to 2 boys. Imagine that. Talking to the boys. That makes me a real father. He went berserk with joy and leapt over the veranda to the road, shouting, "Twins!" He jumped like a stag. "Makalay has borne me twins." He went dashing around the houses. Fowls scattered in front of him. He saw a rusty cutlass, picked it up and playfully chased after animals and children. He surprised the virgin girls coming from the streams with buckets of water on their head. They mistook his wild look of joy for one of insanity. Flinging down their buckets, they fled in panic into the bush. Yankuba had a good laugh from that. He stood by the path, rusty cutlass flung on the grass at his feet, and shook with laughter. Unexpectedly, 4 strong farmers, who had been creeping in on him from behind, grabbed hold of him tight. "Hey, let me go. He strained to free himself from their vice-like grip. Let me go. What have I done? Come on, tell me before I get mad with Og. He dug his heels on the ground and pulled back, but he was no match for them. They dragged him into a room, flung him in and secured the door after him. Left alone, he advised himself not to panic, not to give in to fright, but to sit back and try to think out the only possible explanation for his being locked up without any explanation. I'm glad you listened to my advice to get hold of him, my lords. Sina bowed low before Chief Alimami and his body of advisers. They were in the court bury. Just as I was telling you, the gods aren't happy with Yankuba. My brother, the priest, told me so. His eyes squinted and watered. He has outrightly rebelled against the traditions handed to our forefathers by the gods. For this reason, he is placed under a curse. This, my lords, is the explanation for Yankuba's insane behavior. And unless the priest, my brother, divines the right type of sacrifices to appease the gods, Yankuba will grow from bad to worse. And your daughters and wives will be in constant danger. What Yankuba did moments ago, chasing after your daughters with a cutlass, was just smoke. If you release him, without first appeasing the gods by means of the priest, then after the smoke will come the fire. Dura came running into the assembly, out of breath and panting. A small boy, sent to the farm by Pose with the bad news, had informed Dura. The elderly man had dropped his farm tools, washed his feet in a stream and hurried to town to secure the release of his son. He refused a seat in front of the assembled elders and demanded an explanation for their locking up his son. The chief explained in a no-nonsense voice, repeating almost verbatim the words of Sina, adding some embellishments of his own along the way. Dura felt sudden anger against the priest, Sina, the chief and the body of elders. They had placed a dark cloud over the good news of Makalay's safe delivery. He decided to tread carefully like a chameleon when addressing the court. My lords, he began. Yankuba should not be judged by our traditions. Sina, the brother of the priest, can vouchsafe that I have always complied with the priest in all his demands. I have never argued against his instructions. He sucked in a deep breath and heaved a long sigh. But this time, my lords, I beg to disagree with the priest and his brother. My son is not mad. He cannot be. I have listened with patience to what you have told me. And I must confess that an act of injustice is being carried out every passing moment that my son stays locked up. Get to the point, Dura, Chief Alimimi snapped. Don't waste our time. What makes you think we acted unjustly? How do you explain your son's insanity? The facts, as I see them, are that Yankuba was jumping around happily because Makalay had safely delivered twins. Dura peered up at the chief and his advisers. What man among you, if his wife gave birth to twins, would not leap around for joy? But we don't chase people with a cutlass, the chief replied. Or is your son the first man whose wife gave him twins, so that his behavior sets the pattern for all other fathers? Dura swallowed, confused for a moment, looking each elder in the eye, trying to discern their feelings on the matter. He met a wall of hard faces that almost depressed him. He fought the feeling away. I think, he said at last, it would be wise to bring out Yankuba so that he himself. Hold it. Chief Alimami stamped his staff on the floor. Do you take us for idiots? Show me one village in the whole of Sonda Chiefdom, just one village, where a madman has been called upon to give testimony in a court. He gave Dura a reprimanding look. This time, Dura, you cannot pass the decision to your son. If you do not have anything positive to say, then I advise that we contact the priest to prescribe the sacrifices you have to offer to make the gods remove this curse from your son. Without that, Yankuba will not be released. We will not put the lives of our children and wives in jeopardy just to satisfy you. Dura buried his face in his hands and remained still for some time. The court waited in anxious suspense. Finally, he lifted his face and it seemed as though he had suddenly aged 10 years. What are the sacrifices? Sine cleared his throat, and the chief turned expectantly to him, nodding for him to speak. The priest, my brother, began Sina, in accordance with the will of the gods, has prescribed the offerings of 2 goats and 3 cockerels. Only the priest can offer the sacrifices, for a fee of 10,000 leons. The meat of the offering is to be shared among the chief and his elders as they represent the village. His squinty eyes shifted around. The cockerels must be given to a man chosen by the priest. That is all, my lords. The eyes of the chief and his advisor swiveled from Sinner to Dora. The elderly man's legs sagged under him and he at last collapsed into a seat. Yankuba had given up trying to find an explanation for his confinement. But he longed to see his wife and sons. His heart thumped at the very thought of Makalay. He could not get her out of his mind. He must escape to see her. In his mind he could still hear her scream his name while in labor. So, what more can a man ask for? He ran his eyes over the cell, carefully examining the low, wooden window. The boards were weak with age. He made up his mind and crossed to the far end of the room. Bracing himself to absorb the impact, he ran toward the window and hurled his weight against it. The window splintered and Yankuba crashed to the outside, tumbling to the ground. He scrambled to his feet, then ran in a crouch from behind the house, across the road to the labor hut. Women and children fled from him in panic. The story of his madness was all over the village. At the sight of a man in the labor hut, the midwife froze in shock. Her mouth dropped open, then she fled outside shrieking. One of the greatest taboos protecting the rights of women against men knowing the secret of giving birth had been broken. Cries of protest swept across the village, and many women ran to the court bury to report to Chief Alimami. Pandemonium broke out. Everybody was outraged, except Dora. He knew his son had been pushed beyond the limits of his endurance. In the labor room, Pose and Makalay cried out with exquisite delight at the sight of Yankuba. Other than his rough appearance and the blood marks on his arms and forehead, he was all right. He kissed Makalay, then knelt beside the bed, prized open the tiny bundles beside her and peered at the puny faces of his sons. He felt a choking emotion grip his throat. He was enraptured. The twins looked so fragile and vulnerable. He was afraid he'd break a limb if he tried to lift them. Suddenly there was a noise. 4 men rushed into the room, and with lightning speed they fell on Yankuba. Before the startled new father could gather his wits, he was hauled to the outside, and his wrists were tied behind his back like a common criminal. He knew it would be unwise to struggle, so he didn't. Pose and Makalay were beside themselves with grief. Pose stood by the door of the hut, wringing her hands, beating her breast in grief as tears streamed down her face. A crowd had already gathered and was humming with suppressed excitement. It parted to make way for Chief Alimami, his advisors, and Dura and Sina. They stood in a semicircle around Yankuba, surveying him as if he was a strange animal from the wild. "There's need here for urgent action," Sina said to the chief. "Things are going from bad to worse. I wonder what the penalty is for breaking this ancient taboo." "I don't quite remember," replied the chief, "but if we consult your brother, the priest." "Right." Sina snapped his fingers. "Yankuba must be taken to the priest. But please, my lord, remind Dura to come with the 10,000 leons fee. Otherwise, the gods will not reveal their way to the priest, my brother. And a great calamity might befall us all." Dura asked around for someone to loan him that big sum. Close friends who heard him melted away to another part of the crowd. The elderly man's shoulders drooped with disappointment. Yankuba bit his lip to suppress his emotions at this public humiliation of his father. "F.A. Father," he called. "Go into my room and look under the bed, you'll see a small wooden box there. Break the lock and take out the money." Dura hurried over and did as Yankuba instructed. He returned with a bundle of money which he handed to Chief Alimami, who passed it on to Sina, who clutched it greedily to his bosom. His eyes danced in his head. "Let's go see my brother, the priest," he announced. "He will not only remove the curse from Yankuba but will divine the punishment or fine to impose on him for his abominable act." The chief, the elders, Dura, Sina and Yankuba, with 2 strong farmers to keep Yankuba in line, went through the forest to see the priest in his cave. In the cave the priest lit a fire. The wood crackled sharply, sending up a shower of sparks. The leaping flames lit the face of Pa Adekali as he sat cross-legged in a circle he had drawn on the ground. Yankuba was forced to sit opposite him, and they glared at each other for a long, tense moment. Chief Alimami, The elders, Dura, Sina, and the bodyguard farmers sat close behind Yankuba, watching with intense faces. Pa Adekali took the cow-red horn from the folds of his wrong coat, and knowing that the bodyguard farmers would protect him if Yankuba became violent, he began to murmur some unintelligible words while waving the horn in Yankuba's face, clockwise, then anti-clockwise. Clutching the horn close to his breast, he shut his eyes and recited some unknown verses. He began to quiver, from his toes to the crown of his head. Suddenly the trembling stopped, his flat eyes shut open. "You are cured, my son," he announced. "It was a long battle with the gods to remove the curse from you. They are angry with you for breaking the longest-standing taboo." He pocketed the horn, rummaged around his elbow-deep pocket, and came out with some bones. He threw the bones on the ground between him and Yankuba, studied them with a grave expression, took a deep breath and exhaled. "It is divinely prescribed," he said at last, "that you must pay the fine of 1 bull and 1 cow every 3 months for a year, counting from this month. The alternative to this is that one of your twin sons will be taken from you at the end of 1 year for training as a priest as a sacrifice to the gods." Like a bolt of lightning, Yankuba shot forward from his sitting position, his forehead extended to strike that of the priest. Pa Adekali saw it coming, raised his palm, and with a startled scream, arrested Yankuba's head in transit. The bodyguards grabbed Yankuba and pulled him to sit down away from the priest. "If you ever touch my children," Yankuba bared his teeth at the priest, "I'll make you regret it for the rest of your rotten life. Control your spirit, my son." Dura patted Yankuba's shoulders. "A man lacking self-control commits many foolish acts. Control your spirit." Yankuba shrugged off the hands that held him and sat back, glowering at Pa Adekali. "There's no need to threaten me," said the priest. "I am not responsible for your strange ways. And until you have fully complied with every requirement imposed on you by the gods, you must not repeat, must not remove or cause to be removed from Pentkili village either of your sons." He swung his flat eyes at the chief and the elders. "The village has the collective responsibility of seeing to it that Yankuba complies with these requirements for the cleansing of the land due to his abominable behavior." He paused. "If not, we shall have only ourselves to blame if the gods punish us with pestilence and famine."